Okay, gang, I want you to take your Bible and turn to James chapter 4. James chapter 4. I think it's important that you have your Bible. So if not, go ahead and pause the video. Go get it. I want you to follow along. I'll explain in a moment. Last time we were in James chapter 1, and we learned that there are many things in life, difficulties, tension, conflict even, that we can do very little about. There's so much going on around us in family, in the workplace, and certainly nationally that can divide us, that can frustrate us, that can pile on the anxiety. We carry it around with us. We're like dump trucks loaded with stress because there are certain things that we can do very little about. James has a prescription for that. It's perseverance. And perseverance is sometimes the only thing that you and I can do when dealing with tension. We put our heads down. We press forward. And how often have we discovered a previously unknown option, something that we had never considered before just because of the tension? In other words, we never would have known what was possible. We never would have known what we were capable of. We never would have seen what was there all along had it not been for the difficulty, had it not been for the tension. Last time from chapter 1, we learned that tension is the epicenter of God's activity in your life. Sometimes the only thing you can do is persevere, but there's good in the perseverance. It builds faith. It reveals the authenticity of our faith, because sometimes there are things that come upon us that we can do little, if anything, about, but we can persevere. So, I'd like to thank the National Football League, the Black Lives Matter movement, and those poor crazy people out in Seattle who've decided to start their own city for proving the point. I can do very little about that, but I can persevere. Now look, I want you to know that what we're going to examine today is a difficult passage. It's tough. I mean, I've ground this thing out over the last 2 weeks. I've prayed over this multiple times because I'll be honest with you, I really don't like what James has to say in chapter 4. It's confrontational. It's challenging. It's very, very difficult to get my mind around, but it's worth us examining, and I want you to follow me closely. I need you to listen with an open mind, and we're going to get through it. Now, church, I've warned you on previous occasions that the news media, the national news media especially, in our country, is profit-driven and sensationalized. CNN is not your friend. Fox News is not on your side, I can promise. They're in the business to make money, not necessarily communicate truth. That being the case, I don't watch a lot of national news. In fact, I watch very, very little. I feel like the radio in my truck will keep me informed. If the nation goes to war, I'm going to know about it. If there's a storm brewing out, a hurricane in the Gulf or the Atlantic, I'm going to know about it. If the president is assassinated, I'm going to know about it. If the economy falls, I'm going to know about it. But it frees and liberates me from the myriad of information in the 24-hour news cycle that I can do little, if anything, about. I can't stop the Washington Redskins from changing their team name or their logo. I can do nothing about that. I can't convince enough people around me that the Black Lives Matter movement is Marxist at its core and cares very little about real issues plaguing the black community, like poverty, like the abortion rate among black women, black-on-black crime. I can't slow the systematic revision of American history or the destruction of our monuments. I can do very little about either. I can't change the minds of millions of young people who've been indoctrinated over the last few decades at school that America is some sort of illegitimate superpower, that white America is privileged, that all authority in America is somehow racist. And I can't convince NFL players not to kneel during the national anthem. I must persevere. America is changing. And I don't like a lot of the change I see. But I can do little, if anything, about it, and neither can you. Now, it's not that I'm powerless. There are some things I can do, however. I have a voice. I can speak out to those who will listen. I can remind you that the United States of America offers the greatest opportunity for freedom and liberty in the history of the world. There is no close second. I can also remind you that in the United States of America, I am free to build whatever I can for my family, for my community, and for my God. I can pray for my neighbor. I can pray for my brother. I can pray for my nation. I can love those around me. I can refuse to engage those who will not listen to anything that's outside the purview of their tiny little bubble of indoctrination or even experience. I can vote my conscience. I can stand with others who embrace the same worldview. I can stand with a massive silent majority who'll never own a football team, who'll never have a national platform in the media, who'll never stand before a microphone for CBS or ESPN, but I can stand with them. And then there's one big one. And this is what we're going to discover today. I can surrender my desires to God. Not sure I like the sound of that one. James says that I should surrender my desires to God. That's the message of chapter 4. You see, the truth is, division has always been in America. It's always been present. The only difference was we didn't have a 24-hour news cycle, peeling every scab off every wound and trying to bring it into your living room. We didn't have smartphones either that notified us of every stupid thing every politician ever says or did, every ridiculous idea that someone in entertainment had to share. I don't know why people want to bring all that frustration, all that anxiety into your life with every notification on a smartphone or 24-hour news consumption, but that's just me. That's just me. The passage we're going to examine today is dedicated to those in conflict. That's why it's so very relevant for us today. James chapter 4 contains a message for those who find it difficult to say, "Brother, I'm sorry," or "Man, I was wrong," or "Lord, I surrender." You see, by nature, man is a fighter. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, go down fighting. That's the American way. When you threaten what I desire, you become my enemy. Isn't that the American way? Well, according to James chapter 4, the conflicts that we so often encounter in our families, in our communities, even in our nation, they find their roots in our unwillingness to surrender our desires to God. You see, our desires are at the core of our conflict. What you desire, what I desire. I mean, think about how relevant this really is. When I'm behind the wheel, I desire that you speed up. You're going too slow. When we're sitting at a light and the light turns green and it's green for 3 full seconds, I desire that you go. When I'm in the fast lane on the freeway and you're next to the truck beside you and you're both traveling at 65 miles an hour, I desire that you pull over, get out of my way. James said the reason we fight, the reason we're divided, it's because of our desires. C.S. Lewis wrote a book many, many years ago, and I was unfamiliar with this book until I heard it referenced. I decided to look it up. I read several passages from it. The book is called The Great Divorce. And in the book, the amazing C.S. Lewis, he describes hell as he understands it. Hell is not some underground cave with, puffs of smoke and fire burning and this little red man running around with a pitchfork. That's not hell. C.S. Lewis describes hell as a place where everybody gets what they want just by thinking about it. Everybody gets what they desire just by thinking about it. And hell is a massive, sprawling city that grows by leaps and bounds every moment because everybody desires something different. Imagine for a moment getting what I want just by thinking about it. I mean, if you don't like rules, if you don't like law and order, well then you can start your own community with neither. If you don't like NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, then you can start your own NFL and forbid it. If you think that all white people are racist and privileged, well then you can build your own neighborhood. It's very colorful, excluding whites. If you don't like Donald Trump, you can be your own president. If you don't like liberal politicians that are moving our nation towards socialism, well, then you can start your own country. Now, to some of you, that might sound pretty good. Getting whatever I want just by thinking about it. Maybe that even sounds like heaven to you. But imagine this city for a moment. It's massive. It's sprawling. It's growing momentarily. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger because everybody desires something different. We become farther and farther removed from one another because of our own selfish desires. They keep spreading us apart. You see, if you could get everything you want just by thinking about it, marriage would dissolve because husbands and wives desire different things. Families would disintegrate because parents and children desire different outcomes. Nations would divide because people groups desire different things. According to the great C.S. Lewis, getting everything you desire just by thinking about it is far closer to hell than it ever could be to heaven. So along comes James. In James chapter 4 and verse 1. Read closely, follow along, open your mind, and hear me clearly. James writes, "What causes fights and quarrels among you?" Pretty good question. Why do you fight? There's a struggle for power between people groups. Why do families fight? Why do races quarrel? Why can't we get along? Why do nations divide? A very relevant question. He's about to answer it. Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? The word desires there comes from a Greek word from which we get our English word hedonism. That particular Greek word is never used in a good connotation in the entirety of the New Testament. James is pointing to the desires that are selfish. These desires that we think are going to make us happy. And that's the goal for many. Happiness. It supersedes anything about truth or God, and certainly not surrender. So James says, why do we fight? We fight because you have your desires and I have mine, and they're in conflict with each other. Watch, verse 2. You desire but do not have, so you kill. Now, wait a minute. I know what you're thinking because this is what I would think. Now, come on. Just because I don't get what I want, that doesn't mean I'm going to kill someone. James is employing hyperbole here. James wants to get your attention. And I don't think he's far off. I mean, think about it. At the beginning, at the root of every murder is a desire. A desire to have, a desire to take, a desire to experience. And think about how practical this really is. I've known couples who've killed their marriage because of their desires. Nations that have divided because of their desires. You can kill an opportunity, literally want it to death because of your desires. You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. Watch this next word. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight. That's a word, covet, that we don't use very often. We know it has something to do with one of the commandments, but other than that, What that word means is you chase, you pursue, you invest. We chase, we pursue, we invest in what we desire. But when we can't get it, that only ramps up our frustration. That only builds the conflict. You covet, you can't get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. James is saying in context, you don't bring your desire before God and say, tell me what you think. You're unwilling to surrender what you want to God. You don't have because you don't ask. This really has very little to do about prayer. I know what some of you are thinking. Well, I don't ask God for what I want because I know He's going to say no. I know that what I want is like out of bounds. Or I don't pray about this because I don't think God cares about certain things. God doesn't care about national unity. God doesn't care about patriotism. So I just don't pray about those things. But that's not the point. The point is, the reason we fight, the reason we quarrel is because of our individual desires. No one's willing to bring their desire before God and say, okay, here it is. Help me sort it out. I surrender my desires to you. Verse 3, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives. Literally, you ask incorrectly. You've got it all wrong. When you do ask, you pray badly, is what James is saying. You've got wrong motives. You're motivated by personal gratification, selfish desires. That means that even our prayers can become powerless because of our own personal desires. I want what I want. That's how I pray. The end. Keep reading. Verse 3, when you ask, you don't receive because you ask incorrectly, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Verse 4, you adulterous people. Don't you know that friendship with the world, this is a brotherly love sort of attachment. Don't you know that that brotherly love you have for your nation can become enmity against God? Whoa. Now think about that for a minute. James is saying that this affection we have for what we desire, even good things, national unity, pride in being American, standing up for what is right, this brotherly affection, this attachment we have, if we're not careful, we're more concerned for that than we are the things of God. Don't you understand, James says. Later, he calls us double-minded because we see it both ways and we want it both ways. We're adulterous people because we want to make everybody happy so long as we get what we want. Don't you understand that this affection you have for what you desire, even if what you desire is seen as a good thing, can become enmity with God? Now, beginning in verse 5 all the way through verse 9, specifically in verse 7, James offers 10 commandments that reveal the secret to resolving our conflict. And they culminate in verse 10. Look at verse 10. Humble yourselves. Well, I'm against that. Humble yourselves, James says, before the Lord, and He will lift you up. Again, in context, James is saying, surrender your desires to God, righteous or otherwise, and then trust God with the outcome. Think about Jesus. You can speak up, you can stand up, but before any of that, Jesus humbled Himself before His Father and trusted God with the outcome. Look, here's what James chapter 4 teaches me. And again, it's confrontational, it's challenging, it's difficult to accept, but it's pretty clear. The first 6 verses reveal that our natural desires, that's what produces all the conflict. I hope that is crystal clear by now. What I desire, what you desire, our natural desires, that's what produces all the conflict. Why? Because I consider myself the measure of all things. I am the measure of all things, not you, not the Democrats, not the Republicans. I am the measure of all things. I can only see the world through my eyes. Oh, I can pretend to know what it's like to walk in your shoes. I can try to see things your way, but naturally I can only see the world through my eyes. That's why my desire seems so right to me, because I'm the measure of all things. Here's something else to consider. I'm driven to control my circumstances. Why, that's self-sovereignty 101. I'm in charge. I'm in control. I know what America needs. I know what your problem is. And then number 3, power and influence, well, they're my best resources. Power and influence, they're my best resources to getting what I desire. Look, listen, church. That's why so many well-meaning, godly, God-fearing, church-going, but misguided followers of Jesus Christ believe that if we can get the right people in office, if we can just vote in the right politicians, America will shine. Not necessarily. Our desires may be perfectly legitimate in our eyes. They might even be seen as righteous. We have a desire for justice in our nation, for equality in our nation, for freedom in our nation, national unity. But the problem occurs when these desires are not readily met. You see, when God or our circumstances or the liberals or Donald Trump, when they stand in the way of what we desire, our humanity stiffens. It rises up. It says, fight your way out. Don't surrender. You're right. What you desire is righteous. And the result is conflict. Now, here's the solution from verses 7 to 12. James says the solution is submission. Submission. How good are you at surrendering your desires to God? Well, before I quit, I want to test you. I want to offer you 4 statements, 4 motivations, 4 ways of praying, of seeing God in His relationship to your desires. And you decide which one best describes you. Here's number 1. I'll do what I want without any thought for God. Look, I'll do what I want without any thought for God. If this is the way you pray, if this is what motivates you, you're probably not a follower of Jesus Christ, because this is the hurdle we have to get over, according to Mark chapter 8, the words of Jesus, to deny ourselves, to take up our cross, to follow Him. Here's number 2. Well, if God gives me what I want, then I'll give Him what He wants. Sounds a little immature, doesn't it? But it's real. It's out there. This may be your motivation. If God will just do what I'm asking, if God will meet my want, my desire, my need, well, then I'm going to give Him what He wants. Well, some religious people in the church, they decided to get together and sort of repackage that one, and they came up with this one. I'll give God what He wants with faith that He'll give me what I want. I'll do for God what He's asking, and then I'm just going to have faith that He'll give me what I want. Let's try and move beyond all 3 and get to this one. I'll give God what He wants, regardless of any thought for myself. I'll be the first to admit I'm not there yet. But that's my goal. That is the clear-cut message of James chapter 4. The more of us who are willing to give God what He wants without any regard for what I want, the more of us who embrace that motivation, the less conflict we'll see in our lives. Look, the conflict in our nation, the conflict amongst people groups, the conflict in your family, it all stems from your own desires. You desire one thing, I desire something else. Conservatives desire something and liberals desire something else. I bet you get that. I bet you understand that. Surely that's crystal clear by now. But here's what you may not get. Here's what you may not understand. This is going to take some time to wrap your mind around this one. Our desires are self-serving. Our desires that seem so natural, our desires that seem so right, the reason for each is they are self-serving. Even if they're righteous in our eyes, even if they're patriotic in our eyes, even if they're unselfish in our eyes, even if they're family friendly, they're still self-serving. You see, we honestly believe that if we could get what we want, we'd be happy. If our nation would do what I want, I'd be happy. We'd all be happy. Well, think about that for a minute. What if you could get what you want? What if I could get what I want? What would that really accomplish eternally regarding the purposes of God? Think about it. What if I could make every athlete in America stand at attention during the national anthem? What would that accomplish eternally regarding God's purpose and plan? What if you could remove every white millionaire CEO in America and replace him or her with a black CEO? What would that really accomplish eternally? What if we could throw you into prison for 10 years for destroying one of our national monuments? What if we could remove a monument that someone found offensive? Oh, there's a good one. What if we could take all these folks that are just so easily offended? You know, you got to dance around certain topics. You got to parse your words. You got to be careful what you eat in front of them. Be careful what you do in front of them. What if we could take all those people who are so easily offended, we could just move them to an island somewhere, let them make a civilization themselves. We wouldn't have to deal with all of their nonsense. What if we did away with our Constitution and our Bill of Rights? What if you could choose a handful of government officials to rule our nation? What would that accomplish regarding God, His plan, His purpose through the ages? What if? What if? What if? What would that accomplish? You might feel better. You got what you wanted. But what would that accomplish for God and His desires? Look, hey, one last big what if. What if a loving, merciful, patient God could reach millions of souls for all eternity just by making you and me uncomfortable for a time? What do you think He cares most about? You see, if God chooses not to remove something, James has taught us He must be using it. Because tension is the epicenter of God's activity. Further, the reason we fight among ourselves is because we refuse to surrender our desires before a God who loves us and who only wants what's best for us. Let's pray together. Father, this is a difficult passage because it confronts our self-sovereignty. It challenges our motivations. Father, I want you to help us this week as we try to wrap our minds around this idea of surrendering our desires before you. Father, may we imitate your Son, who lived in perfect balance, beautiful harmony. He stood, He spoke out. But Father, He was humble. He was surrendered to you. Make it so in our families, our communities, and our nation. Because of Christ, I pray it. Amen. God bless you, Grace Community Church. Make it a great week, and I will see you next time.